are talking to Jenna Weakland. We are very honored that she had the time to speak with us, and we are going to dig into some juicy stuff. So, who are you? What do you do?
Hello, and thank you for having me, for reaching out. I'm Jenna Weakland. I knew you were going to ask this, and I always fumble with this question, like, how do you encapsulate yourself? Well, I'm me. I'm a human. I am also a speaker, spiritual teacher, entrepreneur, most specifically known now with my work with Dr. Nicole, with the holistic psychologist. We run and co-create the Self-Healer Circle, our online virtual membership, and then really on various platforms just are continuing to learn ourselves, who we are and what we do, creating video content, new content that displays and teaches, really taking on your life, taking responsibility for your life, gaining and cultivating awareness and consciousness, and really creating and going after the life that we desire versus the lives that we have all ended up with. So encapsulated, who am I? It is just an evolving being who is here learning and growing myself, and just really teaching that and sharing that along the way.
Yeah. And that's so interesting, because we've been taught that we are our name and our age and what we do. And now the times have shifted so much and we're asking each other, so who are you? And I've always asked people, how are you? I never know what people are doing for work. I have no idea.
Yeah, you don't care. You just want to know if they're all right.
Are you happy?
I love that. I think I've at least noticed it's a very American thing. Like at any networking thing or anything, it's, hi, what's your name? What do you do for work? Or what do you do? And everyone's trait of who they are is usually a description of their job employment.
Yeah.
I think it's also like derived from this very Protestant thing that you are your efforting. Like you don't have to necessarily produce anything, but you have to show that you're making an effort all the time. Like you're not resting, you're just working. Doing. Exactly. Yeah. So, and now we're coming to a time where people are actually starting to be and sharing.
That is like making troubles in the families when
So our parents' generation were very much in the doing space, and
we want to explore who we are and how we best thrive. And they're like, what are you doing? It's too dangerous. Just get a job and get that house, and send the kids to school, and the pension and the car, and that old world's just non-existent anymore. Like it's fading out, and it's fading out rapidly.
It is fading out rapidly.
Yeah. And with that comes like this change where, because our parents, like they did, like we all know they did the best they could with the toolbox they had, but they nurture different aspects, also meaning that some aspects of us got lost on the floor. So we would like to talk to you about reparenting. Like it's become this big thing. Like it's almost everybody's starting to talk about it now, but this is one of the tools in your toolbox, and we see you talking about it. So what is reparenting, and how do you help people reparent themselves?
How do you do it?
How do you do it?
How do you do it? I think this is such an important topic, especially now, because like you're saying, that sort of old world is rapidly dissolving, and it's not very smoothly dissolving. You're sort of seeing a big clash where it makes a lot of sense, where in older generations, even in my parents' generation, it was a primal survival to stay a part of your pack, to stay in community and have acceptance by community. And acceptance by community was to follow the mold, to have a knowing of what you are going to become. Because in that knowing, there's then comfort. Anything unknown signals to our body the same way it would as if we walked out of a bush and there was a tiger in front of us. We go into that fight, flight, and fear response. It's very scary because it's unknown. So we're seeing this sort of eruption or a great divide almost right now. And one of the key things I think for me and in our work, in anything that I teach, is coming back to the core of you. Any work begins with you, and the you that it's beginning with is the inner child that is within you. We were all once little physical children. Yes, we've all grown now into these adults. And for many of us, we didn't have a parent or parent figure that gave us and met all of the needs that we deserved. A lot of us grew up in traumatic or chaotic environments. And even if they weren't, extremely traumatic in a very outward, obvious way, that doesn't mean that all of our internal needs were met. So as an adult, we're now adults walking around, or children really walking around, stuck inside of these adult bodies, still needing that parent figure to nurture us. Those needs don't just close when they're not met and you become an adult. They actually just, in a way, kind of fester and grow deeper and louder, but they're tucked so far away in our subconscious inside of us that we don't give them the time of day. We don't give light to them. We just, kind of cruise through life now in adulthood and wonder why things aren't working, wonder why we can't deal with our own emotions, or maybe we don't even have an awareness that we don't know how to deal with ourselves. And we see this a lot. I see this a lot with parents who, really want to do the work to heal themselves because they want to be a better parent. They're doing everything they can to create a better life for their child. And there's such a hyper focus on the child. And the first thing that we'd say is really to take the mirror and redirect it back on you, because children are actually learning so much more by what you do rather than what you say. And when you're acknowledging as an adult that there is a little you inside of you that needs its hand to be taken, who needs to be held, who needs to be honored for its emotions and its needs, a child sees that when you give yourself that time. So that's great. How do you hold that child's hand? What does that look like? That's what we're talking about as reparenting. It's first acknowledging the inner child within us, and then being really honest with ourselves and accepting responsibility for the fact that I now, as an adult, am the one responsible for becoming my own wise inner parent, for parenting that inner child that didn't get the needs met that it deserved.
Yeah. Like I see it like all these traumas, they sort of function like anchors. So you can almost picture is like all these anchors from boats sticking out of your back with like these long ropes, and they're all hooked into the ground, and people are trying to move forward, but they're struggling against that. And because they don't want to look back and they don't want to feel into that, then they have to push so hard to move forward. But if they would take the time to just sit and feel those anchors and give it that attention, give those traumas that attention, you can start to dissolve that, then it becomes so much easier to move forward.
Mm-hmm. There's some popular saying that just has a rhyme to it, that to heal it, you need to feel it. And
yeah,
it's true. And to even begin embarking on healing it, because healing isn't a one-stop shop, right? This is a lifelong journey. Even now, my voice is hoarse, as I shared with you guys right before we hit record. It's because of the last few days for me having an upheaval of emotion that has all been well stored from my own childhood. That is, a lot of anger, a lot of sadness, and a lot of even just stomach churning for facing the reality of, for me personally, how bad things were and how abusive things really were at some times. Well, for most of my childhood. And even I, years into healing, can see now where I've put on my own rose-colored glasses, where, I haven't been fully honest in just accepting and allowing myself to feel it. And my voice being a result of this just goes to show those things don't disappear. Those emotions don't go away. They still live and swirl through us until they actually get acknowledged. And for many people, we see this come up, in an argument at Christmas dinner 10 years later, or in some fight with my partner. Like Nicole and I the other day got into a huge fight, and I will absolutely say it was all of my past anger and resentment in childhood that I never allowed myself to accept or feel, that then was being projected onto someone else who in this case didn't hurt me and who didn't deserve that. But that emotion was still stored and needed a place to go. So being an adult, being that wise inner parent, is looking at ourselves when we talk about reparenting and creating a safe space to allow ourselves really to feel for the first time. Many of us are 30, 40, 50, 60 and actually feeling for the very first time. And I think that is really important to be normalized. That's not odd. That's actually really something to celebrate, that we are evolving as a species to a place that people are able now to cope, to allow those things to come to surface and just to be with the feelings themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when so the one aspect here is like the healing of yourself, but now you're also talking about like, what about the family situations? Because there's, for many of us in these days now, because we're developing all in a certain direction, and for me at least, it feels like I love my parents, I love my family, but the schism is just growing so large. So what do we do about that? Like when we go back to our families, you have these traumatic experiences. I don't know if you've cut off your family or if you see them, or but what do we do about our family?
And I think it works the other way around too. It's hard for our parents to have a normal conversations with us now as we do with them. What do we talk about except for the weather, right?
Right. What is a normal conversation?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard.
Do you have a solution? Please.
Just any subject. What can we do? Yeah.
Sports.
Well, to be honest, it's been so. We just got done. Nicole and I just finished recording a soundboard episode on Mother's Day and on this and on our parents. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that whenever we're talking about solutions or anything, to keep an open mind and an open window that even that will evolve. I've been through so many different phases and stages with my connection and communication with my family. And it's all been the result of, where I am now. There were years ago, I'd say in the last 10 years, there were a handful of years where I didn't speak to my mother. I think I didn't speak to her for 4 years. There was a period of about 10 years where I was not in communication with my older brother, Jake. He's only 1 year older. And I have a twin brother, Josh. So we are very close. And Jake struck my mom too. My mom, my dad, and Jake all have struggled with addiction. Jake, actually, I have him right here with me. This is Jake. Jake died in November as a result of his addiction. And I'm grateful because we got back in touch after years of being, in non-communication, because he was in active addiction. And the addiction, being around that in the environment it put us in, I mean, everyone in my family had restraining orders against each other. He attacked my twin brother one night because my twin was defending my mom, who Jake was physically attacking because Jake was high. And Josh picked up a cane or something to protect my mom and hit Jake. And Jake, being high and being an addict, very smart, very brilliant, very manipulative, called the police first, actually had Josh arrested for battery and assault, put Josh in jail for a night, and now Josh lives with a felony charge because of this, that, you know, we can't get removed. Jake's even tried to get it removed. So that's the kind of environment that was around. And I didn't want that for my life. I couldn't do that for my life. So, I mean, I left New York, where I grew up, when I was 17, and literally never went back. I've lived in 5 or 6 major cities since then. I've created so many different networks and such a life. And through that period of healing, you know, I knew that I needed to not have communication. It doesn't mean it was easy. It was very tormenting. It was hard to know that, you know, Jake was in rehab, or Jake was in prison, or my mom was struggling. But I knew that I also wasn't responsible for coming in to save the day. And I feel my heart so pulled to go and do that, where I still now am even getting present to moments where I still want to swoop in and save them. I've always been my mom's mom my entire life. And I'm only really seeing now just how much anger and resentment that is so valid that I have towards her. And even sharing that makes me feel in some way like guilty or shameful. And I feel bad, because I really love my mom. My mom's soul is from another realm. She's very spiritual, very, very knowing, and very in touch with nature. And then in her human form, she is, you know, very codependent. She is an alcoholic. She has been living on my brother's couch since Jake died 6 months ago, and doesn't have a home to go home to, because her home to go home to is a home that I pay for, though it's dilapidated and is falling apart. It actually is condemnable. And to say that even in some way would have felt embarrassing before, but it's, again, I want to go in and like make that right. Like, it's my role. So actually the last time I spent all together with Jake, Josh, and my mom was a month before Jake died in October. And I had rented a huge dumpster to put outside of my mom's house. And I enrolled my brothers in coming over to my mom's house to just clean stuff out for her. And I'm grateful that we did that. Even that in itself is traumatic in so many ways. And I look back on it, and while I'm glad I did it, I also see how not okay that is to even have that expected of you. And I've been really learning how to separate the validity of my anger, of my resentment, of what's not okay, and also still being able to come from a space of gratefulness and love for my mom, and having that understanding that, yeah, she's only doing and has ever done the best that she could, yes, with the tools that she had, and that also fell short of the needs that I deserved as a child. And I think sometimes when we say that, you know, our parents are doing the best they have with the tools that they have, or the best they can, we sometimes bypass the fact that we also do really need to be responsible for and accept that while that's so, they are also responsible for not meeting those needs. And that's well and done, because you can't unhappen something that's happened. So now as an adult, I need to go meet those needs. And that might mean that contacting my family or being in communication with my family puts me in an unsafe environment, or it locks me into the past. And I've very much experienced that, where I didn't speak to them for years, and then experienced getting back into touch with them, which I'm grateful I did. I got to experience Jake in recovery and sober for a few years, and I will forever cherish those memories and that time. And upon Jake's death, it's now ripped off a new Band-Aid of seeing the reality of just the codependency, the dysfunction, the current state of my mom and her health, and the expectation that she just now, Josh takes care of her, when Josh is the one who found his brother dead in his own house. And he's never even gotten to process that, because he's now dealing and processing with my mom's existence there, which also isn't okay. So now I'm sort of experiencing this moment of, you know, I thought we were past this. I thought I had dealt with all of this. I thought we were smooth sailing in the wind, and turns out I'm not. I had bypassed a lot, and I'm looking newly again at, you know, what boundaries do I maybe need to instill again, even though
Yeah.
my mom's health isn't well. And every day I get a message about her dying, and that could happen. Today could be the day she takes her last breath. That is where she is physically at. So to also have that knowing and awareness, and to know now this is my big opportunity to make a new choice. Do I make a choice that completely betrays myself and my own need to go down the same path I did before and bypass it all? Or do I make a new choice that may be very difficult and in some ways very painful, because I'm mourning a mother that I never really had? Now's my opportunity to really make a tough decision, put myself in the seat of priority, and make choices that honor me, regardless of that impact that they have on others, while also still being, a space of compassion. This doesn't mean I'm an awful daughter or an awful person. My mom may never, and likely will never, understand why I may need the space that I need, or why I might put those boundaries up. But that choice is for me. And really, the only way you're going to make that choice too is the practice of, if you don't believe it yet, really training yourself to accept the fact that you are in fact worthy. And for me, for the longest time, I know I was my parents' parent and my brother's parent because they were more worthy than me. I didn't have that worth. And when you spend a whole life without that worth, and you then decide to tell yourself, oh, I'm worthy, I'll put me first, there's no way in hell that any part of you is going to believe it. So it really does take a practice over time to get there.
That is a very extreme version of what most of us are dealing with on a much lower level, like, because none of our parents, like, well, I can't say none of it, but like most parents, because they also had trauma and their baggage, had aspects of them that weren't grown up, where we actually, if we picture ourselves standing across from them, like, and we're a 5-year-old and they were a 30-year-old body, but inside that 30-year-old body was a 2-year-old girl, then, and we were the 5-year-old. That's actually how it is in many situations, but yours is so extreme that it becomes really apparent and a really good.
So you kept triggering each other all the time with all your traumas.
All of the time.
And we
Even
stopped.
What was that?
Yeah, I said, can we stop this, please, or to take another round? Ding ding.
Yeah, you can dissolve it. I think that we were just talking about this. Triggers are great. I really look at them as great. They're just feedback. Any experience we have is just feedback from the universe. So anything that triggers me, I really thank God for, because that's the place I need to go. That's where I see what's left to be healed, or maybe even what was out of my scope of awareness. And family for me has always been my backdrop for that, because I did, even in high school, my dad left. My dad is also an addict. He still is an addict, though it's now legal. He is dependent on his fentanyl and all of the painkillers that he takes, and that stemmed from his addiction when I was a child, which is then where Jake learned and saw and recreated the same environment, became an addict, and died from addiction. And my father, multiple times in high school, so twice in high school, I actually went to live with him in Pennsylvania. He lived about 8 hours away. He didn't always live 8 hours away. We grew up in the same house. When I was about 8, he had overdosed a couple of times, and was like borderline by a couple of seconds, was resuscitated and brought back, survived, and went to rehab. And then from rehab, he moved to Pennsylvania, and I just didn't hear from him for a couple of months and then a couple of years. So he kind of just disappeared and popped back up when I was around 12 or 13. And I had fantasized so much about who I thought he was or who I wanted him to be. Every need that little Jenna had got cultivated into this mindset of who he was. So I went chasing after him. I remember calling social services and finding out, what's the legal age you have to be when you can choose which parent you live with. It was 14. So at 14, I moved to Pennsylvania. I went to a different school. I went to go live with him in this tiny little trailer in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. Went to this public school for a couple of months, only to have my father, who I haven't seen, mind you, since I was 8, the last time him overdosing. He now comes into my room at 14, a couple of months after me being there, sobbing, sits on the bed next to me, and I, perk up. I hold him, I'm rubbing his back, I'm taking care of him. And he says, you need to go back to New York. I can't raise you. Like, I love you. I don't want to do this. I can't do this. I can't raise you. So I think, all right, well, I'll say goodbye to my friends. I'll pack up my stuff. Eventually I'll go back, and nope, next morning, Saturday morning, I'm back in New York, and I don't talk to my dad or hear from him for years. And because the environment in New York was also so tumultuous, I'm still chasing after this idea of a person that I've created that meets the needs that I want. Now, that never came to fruition, but I went back to Pennsylvania at 17. I went to a different high school because I didn't like the first one. And I spent my whole 11th grade year there. While I was there, my dad went to rehab twice, taught me how to open a bank account because I had gotten old child support that he had never paid, opened that bank account only to take the debit card and use it as his. I was like, well, if you're living here, you have to pay bills, X, Y, and Z. So in reflection, I see, okay, well, I lived there. You went to rehab. You essentially used me, took the car that I bought, like a very unhealthy, unstable environment. So, and during that time period too, I wasn't allowed to talk to anyone in New York. I actually had to, at school, I started cutting that year. I was got very depressed and was really struggling with the reality that I had left New York because it was so bad. And now here I am in Pennsylvania, and my father and my stepmom, who is 25 years younger than my father and could be my sister, are violently fighting all of the time. My dad is in and out of rehab, was in and out of the hospital from heart attacks in the ICU, is taking my money. I'm not allowed to speak to anyone in New York. It was a lot. So I actually, talked to people at school because I was still 17, underage, and tried to find people who could help me. But the only way I could speak to them was to have my dad sign off permission. So we had like a stack of any paper you could ever legally need to have this permission. We highlighted all of the signature lines and devised this plan that really early in the morning, because where I went to school was far away too, and I drove myself. So I left at like 6 a.m. So really early, probably around 4, I would wake my dad up, make up this elaborate thing about a field trip, which I did, give him all of the paperwork to sign while he was half asleep, and he did. And when that happened, I was then legally okay to talk to people, to talk to a social worker, to call my mom in New York. And I did. And when that school year ended, I moved back to New York, and I hadn't seen my dad for a decade after that. Also, I know we're going on about this now, but that year living with him too, I tore my ACL the first week that I lived there. He canceled my health insurance because he didn't want to pay it. So I was on crutches with a torn ACL for that entire year. And then finally left that year, went back to New York, didn't see or speak to him for about 15 years. Because I needed that space. It was absolutely not healthy. It was not okay at all. And through my own healing, I realized, there's a lot of completion there for me. There's a way that I can see him as, like you were saying, as the little Jim inside of him who was a severely bullied and physically abused and traumatized child who lost his sibling when he was in his 20s. He's been through tremendous trauma in his life that he never faced or coped or healed from, and instead coped through addiction, did the same thing then that I see my brother doing. And I reached out to him a few years ago. I actually flew him out to Denver where I was living, and I got to spend the weekend with him to try and really meet him for the first time or get some closure. And it was powerful for me to be able to forgive in a sense. But even then, I look now, that was maybe 5-6 years ago in Denver. Haven't seen him at all since. The next time I see him is at Jake's funeral in November. And I'm not even aware of the dynamic because I'm so in it. It took my partner, Lolly, saying to me actually a couple months ago, you know, I was watching at your brother's funeral and I paid for my dad to come up at the funeral, set his hotel, everything up, organize it all for him. And she said, your dad never once came up to you and asked you how you are. And it struck me so much because my dad's not a horrible person. He has the biggest heart in the world, though courage is not something that was ever cultivated. He didn't have a way to speak to me. He didn't know how to connect or be a father around me. He can't forgive himself for the existence that we had. And now he can't forgive himself for the fact that his son followed in his very footsteps and is now no longer here. So it's so interesting now to see too, that I am the adult really seeing my parents, yes, as adults, but really experiencing them as the children that they are, because in a lot of ways, that's where their development and their emotional maturity really halted. No, not really at the fault of themselves. They also didn't have all this information, or like what you guys are doing, they didn't have this available to them. Though it is, when you are an adult, it is your responsibility to either create a new path or not. And I think for many of us now alive, our parents, their generations, and our parents' generations, they didn't have these tools. Many of them did get halted at a very childlike maturity or mentality, and their bodies kept growing. They produced children, they became adults and parents, but they did mentally stop developing in many, many ways in that childhood state.
Yeah. Yeah, wild. I mean, it's wild seeing these physically grown up people that have been taking care of us through large parts of our lives and seeing them as children, really. I mean, it's wild.
Yeah, and finding the child inside yourself
Yeah.
and go, that's why.
Yeah.
That's why I'm this way.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
and then having to find out, like, how do you give that child, when you discover that wounded child within yourself, like how do you give it what it needs, because you have you have pushed that need down for so long that the crying child inside, like the voice is very far away. You can just feel the pain. Like sometimes it's a very physical pain, or you can feel there's some need, but it's so far away that it's difficult to find out like what it is it really needs.
Yeah, and I think you only discover what it is that it really needs, or that what you really need, when you actually create and take the space to allow those answers to come forth. A lot of us, expect to just have an answer right away, or we will teach, ask your inner child, I'll sit and ask little Jenna, what do you need? What brings you joy? How do you feel? And that can feel really awkward sometimes, first, to even acknowledge that there's a little you inside of you, but it's you. I'm now 35-year-old Jenna, but I'm little 8-year-old Jenna, who is still so traumatized by so many things because no adult around me spent the time at my level to attune to my emotions or to check in. So that doesn't mean over time that was suddenly just cured and little 8-year-old Jenna is fine now. No, she's still here. I need to now spend time, which actually really might look like, and does look like, carving out 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, spending time with my hand on my heart, asking myself, what do I feel? What do I feel in my heart right now? What does little Jenna need? And a lot of the time people will say, well, I hear nothing. I ask myself these questions and I hear nothing. That's okay. That's also to be expected. It's carving out that time to actually be with ourselves. That's the only way we're going to even have space for ourself to really come through, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's so much work to do, right?
There's so much work to do in the world.
It's so new because it's like we're like the first generation to actually do this. So it's so much, right?
It feels like a lot of, in a lot of ways, it feels like a lot of baggage. I don't love that terminology necessarily, though it does, right? When you said that, I just pictured, like, as you were saying earlier with the anchors, it does feel like so much weight. And even that can be really frustrating, where, it's an amazing opportunity that we have now, especially just with technology, where we are in our lifetimes. This is the most incredible time and space for us to, one, have connection and community around the world, and to have access to tools and healing and really hearing other people's experiences and hearing other people share and sharing our own to be received by others. I think that is in and of itself sometimes the most healing. And now we have that. I mean, it took me 2 seconds to pick up my phone. The whole world is at my fingertips here. And I think having the courage to even speak about it, and if you're not the one speaking about it, having the courage just to look at it and to acknowledge, like, shit, I've got some work to do. That's a really big first step. And I think collectively, we're all kind of unanimously doing that. There is sort of an awakening that is undeniable, where you can't sort of dig your head in the sand. Now it's almost impossible because there's so much information coming at you all of the time. So I think the biggest service you can give yourself is to actually accept and face reality, and look at reality as something that's actually really empowering. Something might feel awful and daunting, and like there's all of this weight of, like, we've got a lot of freaking work to do. And so does everyone else in your lifetime right now. We're all going through this collective experience together.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked what you just saw, head on over to whoselifeisitsummit.com/podcast, where you can find full-length episodes as well as in audio format, and we do a lot of other cool stuff. You can hang out with us and other like-minded individuals who want to create a world that works for everyone. And we do that on our platform, where we can chat, and we have Q&As and exclusive interviews as well. So there's so much to get over there. So come on over and play with us.